At the will reading, my parents laughed while handing my sister $6.9 million. Me? They gave me $1 and said, "Go earn your own." But when the lawyer read Grandpa's final letter, my mom started screaming. I couldn't believe what happened next. My name is Amanda Riley, and at 28, I never expected to be sitting in a mahogany-paneled conference room watching my family's true colors emerge with such brutal clarity. As a senior forensic accountant at Whitmore & Associates pulling in $165,000 annually, I'd spent years unraveling complex financial deceptions for Fortune 500 companies. But nothing had prepared me for this moment when my own family's deception would unravel before my eyes. The law office atmosphere was thick with tension and expensive perfume. My mother, Elizabeth, sat rigidly in her Chanel suit, constantly checking her manicured nails. My father, Richard, a corporate attorney who'd always treated family gatherings like board meetings, drummed his fingers impatiently against his briefcase. My sister Caroline, 3 years older and perpetually perfect, crossed her designer-clad legs and smiled that practice smile she'd perfected at countless networking events. Then there was me, in my simple black dress, clutching a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should. The envelope that had just destroyed everything I thought I knew about my grandfather Maxwell's final wishes. "Well, that's clarifying, isn't it?" my mother had said with a sharp laugh when Mr. Peterson announced my $1 inheritance. "Some kids just don't measure up." Her voice carried that familiar tone of dismissal I'd heard countless times growing up, the same tone she'd used when I chose environmental science over business school, when I spent weekends volunteering instead of networking at country club events, when I'd consistently disappointed her by refusing to follow Caroline's perfectly mapped trajectory. But as I sat there, watching my family celebrate Caroline's windfall while dismissing me entirely, my professional training kicked in. Years of analyzing fraudulent financial schemes had taught me to look for inconsistencies, to question convenient narratives, and to follow the money trail. And right now, something about this entire scenario felt fundamentally wrong. Grandpa Maxwell had been my closest ally growing up. While my parents criticized my environmental research career and compared me unfavorably to Caroline's business achievements, Grandpa had been the one person who truly saw and valued me. He'd funded my graduate research, spent hours discussing conservation strategies, and had always treated my work with respect and genuine interest. The man who'd told me just 6 months ago that I was the future of our family's values wouldn't leave me essentially nothing without a compelling reason, especially not when he knew I was the only family member who genuinely cared about his well-being rather than his wealth during his final illness. As Mr. Peterson continued with the procedural details, I found myself analyzing the situation with the same systematic approach I used for corporate investigations. First red flag, the timing. Grandpa had updated his will just 2 months before his death, well after his cancer diagnosis when he was supposedly in cognitive decline. Second red flag, the dramatic imbalance. Caroline receiving $6.9 million while I got $1 wasn't just unfair, it was mathematically suspicious. Third red flag, my parents' behavior. They weren't surprised by the disparity, they were smug about it. However, Mr. Peterson continued, his voice cutting through my analysis, Maxwell prepared additional instructions to be revealed after the initial reading. He dimmed the lights and activated a screen that descended from the ceiling. My grandfather's face appeared, recorded perhaps a month before his death. Despite the cancer's toll, his eyes held that sharp intelligence I remembered from our countless conversations about investment strategies and environmental policy. "If you're watching this," Grandpa began, "then you've heard the initial will distribution. But as any good investor knows, the first numbers you see are rarely the complete picture." That familiar smile played at his lips, the same expression he wore during our chess games when he was several moves ahead. "Amanda, my dear granddaughter, you received $1 in an envelope. That envelope contains instructions for accessing information that will change everything. The others receive their distributions based on a lifetime of choices and behaviors that I've observed and documented carefully. My heart began racing as I realized what was happening. This wasn't abandonment, this was strategy. Grandpa had orchestrated something far more complex than a simple inheritance distribution. To understand why I've structured things this way, the recording continued, you need to know about Riley Innovations, a company I founded in 1992 that developed revolutionary circuit designs for computer processors. The company was sold in 1995 for what appeared to be market value, but was actually a fraction of its true worth due to fraudulent interference. I felt the energy in the room shift dramatically. My parents had gone absolutely rigid, and Caroline was staring at the screen with growing confusion. The interference came from within my own family. My daughter Elizabeth, who was working in Wilson Technologies' acquisition department, and my son-in-law Richard, who was providing me legal counsel, conspired to undervalue Riley Innovations and facilitate its sale to Wilson at a massive loss to me and massive profit to themselves through undisclosed compensation agreements. My mother's face had drained of all color. My father looked like he might actually be ill. I discovered this betrayal 5 years ago, when a Wilson executive's deathbed confession revealed the entire conspiracy. Rather than confront them immediately, I chose to test everyone's character one final time through this inheritance process. The screen showed documents, emails, financial records, legal opinions that had been deliberately falsified. My professional eye immediately recognized the hallmarks of a sophisticated financial fraud, one that had cost my grandfather approximately $47 million in lost profits and patent royalties. Amanda, Grandpa's voice continued, your envelope contains the location of my private study at the Lake House, where you'll find complete documentation of the Riley Innovations fraud, as well as the true extent of my estate, which totals approximately $73 million rather than the $15 million revealed today. My jaw dropped. $73 million. The choice of how to proceed is entirely yours. You can expose the fraud and pursue criminal charges against your parents, or you can implement the alternative inheritance structure I've prepared, which places the majority of the estate in a trust that supports environmental research and conservation efforts, work that actually matters. The recording paused as Grandpa leaned forward slightly. But remember, everyone's actions during this process have been carefully observed and will factor into the final distribution. As the screen went dark, the silence in the room was deafening. Then my mother's composure finally cracked completely. "This is insane," she screamed, her perfect facade shattering. "He can't control us from the grave. We'll contest this entire charade." But I was already calculating. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly what kind of evidence would be needed to prosecute financial fraud of this magnitude. If Grandpa had spent 5 years building a case, the documentation would be ironclad. More importantly, I had the professional network to verify every detail and the strategic expertise to leverage this information effectively. "Actually, Mom," I said quietly, my professional training taking over, "this is brilliant. Grandpa didn't just leave me money, he left me the tools to seek justice for one of the most sophisticated family-based financial frauds I've ever seen." My father tried his typical authoritarian approach. "Amanda, you don't understand the complexities of business decisions." "I understand fraud," I interrupted, "and I understand that the statute of limitations on conspiracy to commit financial fraud in cases involving ongoing damages is 7 years, which means you're both still criminally liable." The power dynamic in that room had shifted completely. An hour ago, I was the family disappointment with a $1 inheritance. Now I held evidence of federal crimes and controlled access to a $73 million estate. Caroline found her voice first. "Amanda, I had no idea about any of this. I swear I knew nothing about Riley Innovations. I studied my sister's face, using the same analytical skills I employed when interviewing potential fraud witnesses. Her shock appeared genuine, and she'd only been 19 in 1995. "I believe you," I said finally, "but this changes everything about how the estate gets distributed." My mother made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. "Think about what you're doing, Amanda. We're your family. We raised you, educated you, supported you." "You dismissed me," I corrected her. "You criticized my career, belittled my achievements, and apparently committed felony fraud against the one person in this family who actually valued my work." I stood up, feeling more confident than I had in years. But Grandpa was right about one thing. This is about character, not money. Over the following week, I drove to the lake house and found exactly what Grandpa had promised. His private study contained 5 years' worth of meticulously documented evidence. Financial records proving the underpayment, communications between my parents and Wilson Technology executives, bank records showing the kickback payments, and legal analysis demonstrating how my father had deliberately provided false counsel to facilitate the fraud. But more than that, I found something else that explained everything. Grandpa's private journals detailing his heartbreak at discovering the betrayal, his decision to test our character through the inheritance process, and his hope that I would choose justice over revenge. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. My parents hadn't just cost Grandpa the immediate sale price differential. They'd cost him decades of patent royalties and licensing fees that would have totaled tens of millions. They'd stolen not just money, but the legacy of genuine innovation that could have funded environmental research for generations. Armed with this evidence, I scheduled a meeting with my former colleague David Blackwell, now a partner at one of Boston's premier white-collar criminal defense firms. David had worked with me on several complex fraud cases, and I trusted his judgment completely. "This is extraordinary," David said after reviewing the documentation. "Your grandfather built a federal case that any prosecutor would love to pursue. The evidence is comprehensive, the damages are clearly quantified, and the conspiracy elements are undeniable." "What are we looking at in terms of potential charges?" I asked. "Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, potentially RICO violations if we can establish an ongoing criminal enterprise," David enumerated. "We're talking about federal felonies with significant prison time and mandatory asset forfeiture." The weight of that possibility settled over me. I had the power to send my own parents to federal prison, but I also had another option. "What about the alternative trust structure Grandpa mentioned?" I asked. David pulled out another set of documents. He created an environmental research trust that would be funded with approximately $65 million of the estate, with you as the primary trustee. Your parents would receive a modest annual stipend, contingent on their participation in community service programs related to environmental restoration. Caroline's inheritance would remain intact, but with ethical oversight requirements. It was elegant in its justice. Rather than pure punishment, it was rehabilitation, coupled with making amends through service to the causes they'd helped undermine. "There's one more element," David continued. "Your grandfather included a provision that if you choose the trust option, your parents must also participate in a formal apology and acknowledgement process, publicly admitting to their fraud and its impact on environmental research funding." That evening, I called a family meeting at the lake house. As they gathered in the same living room where we'd held countless holiday celebrations, I realized this would probably be our last interaction as anything resembling a functional family unit. "I've reviewed all the evidence Grandpa left," I began. "The fraud is undeniable, well documented, and prosecutable. You cost him $47 million in lost profits and royalties that were intended to fund environmental research." My father attempted to maintain his authoritative stance. "Business decisions always involve risk, Amanda. Your grandfather understood that." This wasn't a business decision, I interrupted, my professional expertise giving me absolute confidence. This was a criminal conspiracy involving falsified legal opinions, undisclosed financial incentives, and breach of fiduciary duty. I have emails, bank records, and witness statements that would convince any federal jury. My mother's last resort was emotional manipulation. You can't seriously be considering destroying your own family over ancient history. You destroyed this family the moment you decided to steal from Grandpa, I replied, but he's given me a choice about how to handle the consequences. I laid out both options: criminal prosecution with probable federal prison sentences and complete asset forfeiture, or implementation of the trust structure with community service requirements and public acknowledgement of their actions. Caroline surprised everyone by speaking first. I want to understand something. If they hadn't committed this fraud, how much would Grandpa's estate be worth today? Approximately $120 million, I answered. The patents alone are still generating royalties that should have been his. She was quiet for a long moment. Then the trust option isn't just mercy, it's still accountability. They're losing everything they should have inherited anyway. My mother broke down crying, but not from remorse, from rage at being caught. This is blackmail. We won't be part of it. That's your choice, I said calmly, but refusing means I pursue federal charges tomorrow morning. My father, ever the strategist, had been calculating throughout the conversation. What exactly would the community service entail? Environmental restoration work, habitat cleanup, tree planting, water quality monitoring, 40 hours per month for 5 years with documented participation and impact reports. And the public acknowledgement? A written statement acknowledging the fraud, its impact on environmental research, and your commitment to making amends through service, published in relevant professional journals and environmental publications. The silence stretched for several minutes before my father spoke again. We'll need to review the trust documents with our attorney. Already arranged, I said, handing them a complete legal package. You have 48 hours to decide. 2 days later, they chose the trust option, not because they felt genuine remorse, but because federal prison was worse than public humiliation. The implementation took 3 months, during which I worked with environmental organizations across New England to establish meaningful service programs. My parents began their community service with obvious reluctance, but something interesting happened around the 6-month mark. My father called me one evening, his voice different than I'd ever heard it. The Watershed Restoration Project is actually fascinating, he said. I never understood how complex natural filtration systems are. The engineering is quite sophisticated. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first time he'd ever acknowledged value in environmental work. My mother took longer. Her required service involved teaching financial literacy to high school students interested in environmental careers. Initially, she approached it as penance to be endured, but gradually, reports from the program coordinators indicated she was becoming genuinely engaged with the students' questions and goals. The transformation wasn't dramatic or movie perfect, but it was real. They began to understand through direct experience why environmental work mattered, not because they'd found religion or experienced miraculous personality changes, but because Grandpa had forced them to invest their time and labor in understanding what they'd helped destroy. Caroline's journey was different but equally significant. Free from the pressure to compete for parental approval, she began exploring her own interests for the first time. She reduced her hours at her investment firm and began volunteering with the Trust's educational programs. When she discovered she had a genuine talent for explaining complex financial concepts to environmental researchers applying for grants, she found something that felt more meaningful than chasing bonus targets. As for me, running the Maxwell Riley Environmental Research Trust became the most fulfilling work I'd ever done. We funded groundbreaking research into renewable energy storage, sustainable agriculture techniques, and climate change mitigation strategies. The work I'd always been passionate about now had resources that could create actual change. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 18 months after the trust's establishment. I was reviewing quarterly reports from our funded projects when I came across a breakthrough in carbon capture technology that had been developed with our grant money. The research team estimated their innovation could remove millions of tons of CO2 from the atmosphere annually once implemented at scale. I thought about Grandpa, about how he'd turned his family's betrayal into a legacy that would help solve the environmental challenges he'd cared so deeply about. His chess master strategy had created something far more valuable than simple revenge. It had created redemption, understanding, and hope. The $1 inheritance had indeed been worth more than millions. It had been worth the truth, justice, and the power to transform betrayal into positive change. Grandpa's final lesson was complete. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to choose what matters most, even when that choice is difficult. My parents completed their 5 years of community service, both transformed by the experience in ways they never expected. My father now volunteers with environmental engineering projects, applying his legal expertise to help conservation organizations navigate regulatory challenges. My mother established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students pursuing environmental careers, using her own money for the first time in years to support something meaningful. Carolyn left her investment firm entirely and became the Trust's full-time grants coordinator, finding genuine fulfillment in helping researchers secure funding for projects that could change the world. She met her future husband, Dr. Marcus Webb, through one of our renewable energy initiatives, and their wedding was held at the lake house where Grandpa's final plan had unfolded. As for me, I discovered that sometimes the best revenge is creating something so meaningful from injustice that it transforms everyone involved, including yourself. The Maxwell Riley Environmental Research Trust now manages over $200 million in assets, funding breakthrough research across 6 continents. Every grant we award, every innovation we support, every environmental challenge we help solve is a testament to Grandpa's belief that true wealth lies not in what you accumulate, but in what you create for future generations. The $1 inheritance taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest gift you can receive because it gives you the element of surprise when you finally reveal who you really are.